possibility of unpredictable friendships grounded on the untranslatable. Just a couple of things about this book, Shishir Dash's Olaukik Shanglap. So this is the book right here. It's a collection of speculative imagined dialogues between ancient Greek and Sanskrit like characters framed as pseudo-translation. So the framing is that these were found in a lost manuscript from antiquity. But of course, this is part of the pseudo-translation genre. So this is very much Shishir Kumar Das's invention. And so the dialogue that I'm focusing on is between Orestes and Parashuram, but there are others, for example, one between Aristotle and Kalidas on the conception of the tragic, right? Like, what is the tragic? Why doesn't ancient India have tragedies? You know, like, those are some of the issues that are discussed there. There is another one, for example, called Teen Andho, Three Blind Men, which is a conversation between Oedipus, Dhritarashtra, and Tiresias. You know, and so on. So it's really like a fascinating work. Okay. With the expansion of globalization in recent decades, the discipline of comparative literature, especially in the Western academia, has had to address the geopolitical complexities of an increasingly decentered world. In doing so, the comparative enterprise has sought to overcome its Eurocentrism by responding to the politics of global literary production and the rise of post-colonial literatures. This territorial refashioning of the discipline has given rise to a renewed investment in the question of ethical sensitivity towards cultures that are radically different from the West. Post-colonial and postmodern critiques of the patronizing gaze of the Western subject has, in turn, injected new anxieties in the task of the translator and the comparatist. Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's Death of a Discipline, for instance, is an important intervention in reformulating these questions within the wider debates in the field. In imagining a new comparative literature based not on globalization, but on what Spivak calls planetarity, Spivak highlights the ethico-political stakes of intercultural translation and the risks that must be taken in reaching out to the other. Spivak's project in this long essay is to introduce a moment of critical self-reflexivity in the field of comparative literature and to propose planetarity as a way of doing comparison. Emmanuel Levinas, in establishing ethics as first philosophy, had already problematized the possibility of engagement with the other's singular alterity without subsuming it within the epistemic coordinates of the Western subject. For Levinas, it is the face-to-face encounter with the other that inaugurates the ethical moment, as the other's face exceeds all categories, refusing epistemic foreclosures. Spivak receives Levinas inflected by Derrida, especially through the notion of the tout autre, the wholly other, as a possibility that is always yet to come. This messianic waiting for the other is characterized by a perennial openness towards the unknown, towards an unknown, unpredicted future that may never actually arrive. Derrida writes, "I am careful to say, let it come, because if the other is precisely what is not invented, the initiative or deconstructive inventiveness can consist only in opening, in uncloseting, in destabilizing foreclusionary structures so as to allow for the passage toward the other." It is this gesture of unending openness to the other that Spivak invokes in Death of a Discipline when she borrows the concept of teleopoiesis from Derrida, which she defines as, quote, an imaginative making without guarantees that makes the task of reading imperative yet indecisive, end quote. The social space between the self and the other is marked by an irreducible curvature, which instead of deterring politics, actually calls for, quote unquote, a more risky political activity. The planet of the other consists of figures that cannot be pinned down by traditional Western hermeneutics. These figures are marked by an excess that unsettle the positions of the self and the other, the reader and that which is read. Throughout this essay, Spivak emphasizes the need for affirmative undecidability, a reading in the mode of to come, if and perhaps. If and perhaps, a reading that is always provisional, ambivalent, incomplete, self-reflexive. She argues that this new comparative literature must be based on planetarity, a system of differences that exceeds and spills over the totalizing fantasy of globalization. There is a sense, I suggest, in which Spivak's formulation of planetarity invokes the conception of the tragic, or even a rasa of the tragic, perhaps. Looking forward to Shumanadi's talk. In his essay, Tragic Time, Sean D. Kirkland, who happens to be my wonderful colleague at DePaul, Sean Kirkland identifies two kinds of temporalities at work in Greek tragedy: dromoscopic time and aporetic time. The first, dromoscopic time, is the temporality of the race, from Greek dromos, race as in when an athlete runs in a race. The first is the temporality of the race, where the origin and end of one's actions are neatly visible, as in a race where one is aware of the starting point and the finishing line. Such an action consists in, quote, racing from a past to a future, such that in one's speed, one treats these as in the starting point and the finishing line, as fixed, simple, manifest, and perfectly grasped, end quote. Aporetic time, on the other hand, is an experience of temporality, where one realizes that, quote, one's past and future, and thus one's very own motivations and aims, are not fixed and clear at all, but complex, obscure, and inscrutable, end quote. The tragic lies precisely in the transition from the first temporality to the second, in our confrontation with the limits of human knowledge. At the tragic moment, we are robbed of our path, Greek Poros, and are left in an aporia, or pathlessness. Tragedy, Kirkland argues, forces us into a recognition of the object of our own desire as yet undesirable, because by definition, it has not emerged into the present from the inscrutability of the future. In other words, after one thinks one has reached the telos of one's journey, one realizes that the relation between origins and ends is never pure, simple, or linear. It is always already contaminated by a temporal excess that lies beyond human grasp. Kirkland identifies a telling moment in Sophocles' Antigone, when at the point of facing inevitable death, Antigone is seized by doubt over her tragic action. At this moment, Kirkland writes, for the first time in the play, she suffers the if, the perhaps, in Greek the ei. She says, if this, then, that is my being punished, is what is pleasing to the gods, then I would acknowledge my error having suffered. She moves along now with hesitation, pausing beneath the weight of her perhaps, of her if, and the attending soldiers are loath to rush her, end quote. Antigone's hesitation, her if and perhaps in her final moments, is, according to Kirkland, the result of her jarring encounter with the aporia that lies in the beyond. Spivak's emphasis on the if and perhaps of the planetary approach finds an ancient echo in the if and perhaps of Sophocles' tragic heroine. Reaching out to the other always involves an acknowledgement of the aporetic dimension of the endeavor, at the end of which there are no paths left, where no finishing line is ever final. In Shishir Kumar Das's modern dialogue, Parashuram and Orestes stand near the edge of a precipice, as they each encounter an alterity they cannot fully comprehend. When Orestes tells Parashuram that he wants to take the road that goes up the hill to reach the temple of Athena, where he expects shelter and vindication, Parashuram responds, you call that a road? That leads you straight to the edge of the precipice. From there, you can only drop into the abyss. Orestes here stands literally at the end of Poros, at an abyssal, vertiginous aporia, where multiple contesting futures are clashing by the night. To return to Derrida's language, this uncanny meeting between the two heroes constitutes an opening, an uncloseting that could at least potentially destabilize foreclusionary structures so as to allow for the passage toward the other. Our actions would decide the future of civilization, says Parashuram to Orestes, suggesting possible futures that may never arrive. But as they poured their hearts out to each other, Orestes remains unflinching in his belief that he has committed no crime. Avenging Agamemnon was his filial duty, even if it meant murdering his own mother. While Parshuram agrees that he too was carrying out his duties as a son, his attitude is often more ambivalent regarding their actions. He confronts Orestes on the inescapable cycle of revenge, asking whether revenge can ever be coterminous with justice, whether the logic of revenge does not then justify the wrath of the Furies, whether revenge is anything more than an uncritical adherence to tradition. Orestes, however, remains unconvinced, attributing Parshuram's guilt to a mind clouded by morality. Orestes says, I just can't make sense of what you are saying, Parshuram. Your mind is being dictated by a strong sense of morality. You are so scared, so weak, because the one you killed is your mother. Had you killed some other woman, you possibly wouldn't be so unsettled. Parshuram responds, well said, Orestes. You too are being dictated by morality. It is the morality of the father. You want to avenge your father's death. Hence your mother's death is of little consequence. My morality too is the father's. I have obeyed his order. Hence mother's death doesn't matter. The father and the mother, the seed and the field, to whom does the harvest owe more? End quote. Parshuram is here broaching a question that resonates across ancient and modern debates about the role of the woman in birth, in the origins of life as such. The seed and the field. Ancient representations of women in both Greece and India frequently used the metaphors of seed and field, plow and furrow, to denote the difference between the sexes and their role in human reproduction. To whom then does the harvest owe more? To whom is Orestes and Parshuram more in debt? To whom are Orestes and Parshuram more in debt? As Nicole Lorho and Thomas Zeitlin have shown, the masculine fantasy of displacing the woman as the site of life's emergence was often realized in archaic Greek myth in a way that served to appropriate and silence the feminine labor of giving birth. The story of Athena's birth is a particularly good example. When Metis, the Titan goddess of wisdom, also Zeus's first wife, was pregnant with Zeus's children, Zeus heard a prophecy that the son of Metis would dethrone him. Just like Zeus had dethroned his own father Kronos, and Kronos had dethroned his father Uranus. Fearing that the prophecy might come true, he swallowed Metis so as to kill her, as well as the unborn children. Having an acute headache afterwards, he called forth Hephaestus, the smith god, who craftily broke his skull open. In a widely reproduced scene from Greek mythology, Athena, already conceived in Metis's womb, sprung forth from Zeus's head as a fully armored adult goddess. The son, prophesied to dethrone Zeus, was never born. In fact, the running joke in Greek mythology is that a prophecy always comes true except when it's about Zeus, because the son that was supposed to kill Zeus was never born. In almost all of Greek literature, Athena is described as solely Zeus's daughter, the embodiment of the masculine fantasy of the perfect goddess, the father's virgin daughter, born without the polluting aid of the mother's womb. Froma Zeitlin reads Aeschylus's Oresteia, the Aeschylus's trilogy of plays, the Oresteia, as the archetypal text for the transition of the subject into paternal law, which must conclude with the man's mastery over the woman. In the first play of the trilogy, Clytemnestra, Orestes' mother, is the strong, rebellious, desiring woman who is plotting against the masculine regime of her husband, the king Agamemnon, and is in an affair with another man, Aegisthus. When Agamemnon returns from the Trojan War, Clytemnestra brutally murders Agamemnon, after which she is in turn killed by their son Orestes, who colludes with their sister Electra to avenge their father's death. Consequently, the Furies, as embodiment of the archaic feminine principle, torment and hunt Orestes down until his case is championed by Athena at the legendary trial on the Areopagus hill. Apollo and Athena justify the superiority of the husband, king male, over wife, queen female by first arguing that conjugality is more important than blood ties, and then by asserting the primacy of the father in reproduction. Athena, born of Zeus's head, gives the final vote, acquitting Orestes of all guilt. And Athena confidently asserts, "No mother gave me birth," referring to her birth from Zeus's head, and proclaiming that the crime of matricide is therefore outweighed by the murder of the husband, king male. Curiously enough, this narrative does not even once mention Metis, Athena's original mother. So it is not true that Athena did not have a mother. Athena did have a mother who was swallowed by Zeus. But this story is never comes up in the trilogy, in Aeschylus' play. The maternal is purged out in this purely masculine retelling of the scene of birth, her active role in reproduction violently silenced. The murder of Metis, this primal matricide, becomes a metaphor for the symbolic erasure of the mother in the process of reproduction. It is perhaps no wonder then that Orestes in Shishir Dasha's Dui Matrighati, two matricides, cannot seem to comprehend Parshuram's dilemmas regarding his crime. While Orestes is yet to reach Athena's temple, we know from Aeschylus' ancient play that the patrilineal culture of Greece would make sure that he finds there an unqualified vindication of his filial allegiance. Yet, Dasha's dialogue introduces a strange gap, an unexpected moment of hesitation in this narrative. Sorry. Yet Dasha's dialogue introduces a strange gap, an unexpected moment of hesitation in this narrative. The tired Orestes pauses to take a breath, encounters a traveler from a distant land, tries to listen to a way of thinking he cannot fully understand. Towards the end of their conversation, as Orestes is getting ready to resume his flight, in order to escape from the Furies and seek vindication in Athena's temple, Parshuram advises him to think more deeply, as, again, our actions, he says, would decide the future of civilization. Shobhotar Bhavishyat. Ancient Sanskrit texts tell us that Parshuram's story ended with the return of the mother, a point that is conspicuously absent from Dasha's modern retelling of the narrative. In the Mahabharata, Parshuram's father, happy that his son has obeyed his order, asks him to make a wish. Parshuram uses this opportunity to have his mother returned to life unscathed. Is it then possible to understand the process of civilization as other than one that requires the repudiation, murder, and overcoming of the mother? Or does this maternal return merely reflect another, perhaps more insidious logic of repression? One of the uncountable stories that the Mahabharata tells us is that of Parshuram and his infamous act of matricide. The stories of Orestes' mother Clytemnestra, as well as Parshurama's mother Renuka, both from royal backgrounds, the former a queen married to the queen Agamemnon, the latter a king's daughter married to a Brahmin sage, revolve around masculine anxieties about maternal desire. If Clytemnestra is the assertive, desiring queen who takes a lover and kills her own husband, Renuka is the otherwise compliant wife, a mother to 5 sons, who is one day aroused by the sight of a stranger. While bathing in a lake nearby, Renuka sees the king Chitraratha, uh, the text says, garlanded with lotuses, sporting in the water with his wives. In a momentary lapse of her chastity, she is, again, the text says, filled with desire and moistens herself. Her husband, the sage Jamadagni, on realizing that she has, quote unquote, lost the beauty of purity, asks each of her 5 sons to kill their mother. When the first four sons refuse to follow his order, they are cursed by Jamadagni and begin to follow the conduct of animals or birds or that of inanimate objects. Finally, the 5th son, Parashuram, beheads his mother without blinking an eye. Unlike Clytemnestra, however, this mother will soon be brought back to life, and the son will ensure that the matricide is forgotten, that his crime does not leave a trace behind. Once Jamadagni's anger was placated, he asks his son to make a wish. Ask for anything you desire, my son, as many wishes as may be there in your heart. Thereupon Parashurama asked that his mother might live again, that the slaying be forgotten, that he should not be touched by the sin, that his brothers might return to their natural state, that he might be unrivaled in battle, and that he should have a long life. The great ascetic Jamadagni granted him everything that he wished for, suggesting that the mother came back to life, right? While this return of the mother from the house of death gives us a sense of immediate relief, we might need to rethink what the forgetting of the murder entails, because one of his wishes is that the murder be forgotten. By the magical powers of the father, the matricide will have been forgotten, as if nothing had happened. The ultimate sadistic fantasy that the victim would emerge unscathed the next morning after a night of violence, rape, dismemberment, fresh as ever, ready to go through another cycle of torture. While the Mahabharata will keep returning to Parshuram and repeat time and again the stories of his great accomplishments, we will hear no more about the matricide. The text will not only have forgotten to return to the mother who has returned from the other side of death, but also forgotten the forgetting itself. The mother herself will seem to have forgotten her own murder. The mother will not be granted even the dignity or the choice of memory, of remembering the violence done to her own body. Without memory and without remainder, without retaining any sign of the disaggregation, the murderous wound inflicted, the mother's body will have come together again. And in this gap between the dismembering and the remembering, in this forgotten fabric of time, stolen through the sacrifice of the mother's head at the altar of the father's morality, the son will have secured his position as the pious father's obedient son, who nevertheless does not forget mom, who nevertheless remembers to resuscitate her by casting on her, with a little help from dad, a spell of enforced amnesia. The returning mother, undead, sanitized, and spectral, will never be heard of again in the epic. The forgetful mother will have been summarily forgotten. An internal critique of Parshuram's matricide is, however, offered by the Mahabharata itself. After the Great War, Bhishma, lying on his bed of arrows in excruciating pain, is imparting his knowledge of dharma to the anxious new king Yudhishthir. When Yudhishthir asks him, "O supreme teacher, in determining what task to pursue, should one decide quickly or should one take time over the decision? We are always confronted with extremely difficult tasks." In response, Bhishma narrates the story of Chirakara, whose name marks him as the one who takes forever to act. Chirakara, it takes a long time to act. We are told that he thought for a long time, slept for a long time, remained awake for a long time, and completed all work after a long time. He was known to be lazy, foolish, and lacking in insight. Once his father, the sage Gautama, discovered his mother's quote-unquote promiscuous behavior. Enraged, he ignored the other sons and asked Chirakala to kill her, asked Chirakala to kill his own mother. While the son initially agreed to do so, the text says, he thought about this for a long time, given his nature, as the father went to practice austerities in the forest. In a long soliloquy, where Chirakara reflects on the respective contributions of the mother and the father, he confronts once again the perplexity, the subtlety, the aporia that is named by dharma. For a long time, he thinks to himself, quote, how will I follow the instructions of my father and yet not kill my mother? While apparently following dharma, how will I avoid being submerged like a wicked person in adharma? Following the instructions of the father is my supreme dharma, yet protecting my mother is also my own dharma. End quote. The mother, says Chirakara, is not only the origin of life, bearing the child in her womb, but also the only one who, quote, knows whom he has been born from, end quote. That's who has the secret knowledge of the child's bloodline, paternal bloodline. Moreover, reflects Chirakara, while it is the utmost dharma of a son to, quote, act in accordance with one's father's words and not think about it at all, end quote, it is against the dharma of a husband, he reflects, to want to kill his wife. A husband's duty, he argues, is to sustain and protect his wife. And when these two traits disappear, when the husband is no longer willing to sustain the wife, he no longer remains a legitimate husband and thus loses his right to right over the woman or right over claiming, wanting the death of the woman. While Chirakara is lost in these ruminations, his father Gautama returns from the forest. So Chirakara spends a long time in these ruminations, and by the time he has decided, his father has already returned from the forest, and his father has by this time also realized the grave mistake he has made. He says, and I mean the text says, the father, sage Gautama, was tormented by great grief, and tears flowed from his eyes. Because of the effects of his learning, he was overcome with repentance. But when he learns that Chirakara, the one who is always late to act, has not yet killed his mother, Gautama embraces his son in joy and praises him thus, quote, O fortunate one, O Chirakarika, for a long time, may you take a long time to act. Because of the long time you took, I have been saved from great misery from a long period of time. End quote. The story of the one who was late to act thus works in the Mahabharata as a corrective parable for the one who was quick to act. That is Parshuram. It is in being late, in taking time, a deferral that threatens to paralyze the movement of action, of karma, that Chirakara experiences the unfolding of his dharma. In other words, what the tale of Chirakara effects is a radical eruption of the dimension of temporality, and thereby of the movement of history in dharma's unfolding. Of the intimation that dharma is not a matter of immutable laws, of rigidly prescribed rituals, but an active living practice, a shadowy yet undeniably syntactic articulation. It is only in this life here, situated within its singularities and contingencies, negotiating its terms and oriented towards an unforeseeable future, that one might experience dharma's quiet, but often disquieting, unconcealment. We may now return to our heroes, Orestes and Parashuram, stranded somewhere in the valleys of ancient Greece, in this modern tale by Shishir Kumar Das, confronting each other's foreignness, and miraculously enough, speaking in a language that they both seem to, at least for the night, comprehend. We would not expect either of them to speak in Bengali, and yet the language has begun to speak, as it were, through them. Parshuram has offered timely shelter to Orestes, who is escaping the furies, vengeful spirits of the heart, of the mother he has killed. Parshuram is asking Orestes to take a step back, reconsider his actions, and think through its consequences for Shobhodar Bhavishyat, the future of civilization. It is as if it were not Parashuram who is speaking these words, but his archaic shadow, the one who suspends action in times of crisis, the one who waits for dharma to light up and show the way. Parashuram, his shadow Chirakara now inseparable from him, has unexpectedly emerged out of the valley in the darkness of the night to confront Orestes, his ethical kin, yet another shadow, with a radical question. The father and the mother, the seed and the field, to whom does the harvest owe more? We know from ancient tragedy what will happen once Orestes reaches Athena's temple and then the court at Areopagus. The father and the son will be vindicated, the mother's role in reproduction denied, and the maternal wrath of the Furies domesticated, their powers directed towards the protection of the patrilineal empire. Just like Parshuram's mother was brought back to life only after being neutralized, rendered empty of desire. In the Bengali retelling, however, Parshuram is calling on Orestes to rethink his understanding of justice, the understanding of justice that is consolidated at his trial, the justice of the father, of the motherless daughter Athena, that becomes the founding myth of the state in Greek thought. By bringing Orestes face to face with the mythological repertoire of the Mahabharata, in which questions of justice, of dharma remain unresolved, Dash is suggesting a reconceptualization of justice as one without closure. We must remember that in this retelling, Parshuram has not been able to forget the murder. The father's boon must have not worked, it must have failed to resurrect the mother, or at least to effect the forgetting that the son was desperately hoping for. Das denies the modern Parshuram the comforting fantasy of such an originary erasure. In this speculative yet deeply telling encounter between the two heroes imagined by Dash, there is a moment when even Orestes seems to pause and introspect, as he recalls listening to his dead mother's eyes speaking to him in a language he could not translate. He tells Parshuram that even as he was scuttling across the forests, he saw two eyes in the moon speak out to him in another language, Onno Bhashaye, urging him to question his dogged belief in the logic of revenge. In this medley of different languages imagined by Dash, the Greek of Orestes, the Sanskrit of Parshuram, the Bangla through which they attempt to communicate, the sounds of the Furies charging towards Orestes, and even the strange lunar language through which the mother speaks, one wonders whether any translation is possible at all, whether these sounds and voices end up as anything more than desperate noises lost in confusion. And yet, this encounter between the two heroes ends on a note of declared friendship. The dialogue had begun with Orestes addressing Parashuram as Bideshi Jatri, foreign traveler. It ends with him telling Parashuram, Bidai Bondhu Parashuram, goodbye friend Parashuram. While the dialogue suspends the final word on whether Parashuram could make his thoughts intelligible to Orestes, suggesting instead the possibility of a total failure of communication, what transpires even in this failure, even in this inability to clearly comprehend the other speaking, is the journey from foreigner to friend. The encounter between Orestes and Parashuram then, instead of synthesizing to individuals and cultures in a way that would disavow and erase their difference, points towards a friendship that is founded on the untranslatable. As Parshuram tells Orestes towards the end of their conversation, we are treading the same path, we share the same destiny, and yet we are different. While Parshuram had initially called Orestes his own reflection, his own mirror, his own shadow, he now begins to realize that despite the convergences between their crimes, their ethical responses are after all distinct, that the image reflected in the mirror does not neatly coincide with oneself. that one's shadow is perhaps never fully one's own, that there is something that resists translation. In our own times, when one of the basic assumptions driving global capital, global diplomacy, and the global academy is the maxim that everything is translatable, the friendship of Orestes and Parashuram reinstalls the problematic of difference and untranslatability at the heart of comparative and translation studies. In the US academia in particular, the last few decades have seen a crucial and necessary movement towards a deprovincialization of the canon through a huge spike in translations of texts from vast and previously unmined geoliterary landscapes. As Emily Apter has shown, however, this extensive drive to anthologize reading lists and resources for a world literature curriculum has often been guilty of presuming a false equivalence between languages and cultures, and of, quote, zooming over the speed bumps of untranslatability in the rush to cover ground, end quote. As a counter to the translatability assumption of world literature, Apter outlines a horizon for a new comparative literature that neither revives the hegemony of the Western canon nor fetishizes the absolute alterity of the other, but instead walks a thin line between translation and non-translatability. In other words, a translational praxis that acknowledges both the impossibility of the translation and the necessity to translate quand même, nevertheless, all the same. Drawing on the Beckettian formula, I can't go on, I will go on. Apter writes in the translation zone, quote, the challenge of complet is to balance the singularity of untranslatable alterity against the need to translate quand même. For if translation failure is acceded to too readily, it becomes an all-purpose expedient for staying narrowly within one's own monolingual universe. A parochialism results, sanctioned by false pieties about not wanting to mistranslate the other. This parochialism is the flip side of a globalism that theorizes place and translates everything without ever traveling anywhere. So they're the two sides of the same coin. End quote. In the story that we have been following so far in this talk, Parashuram and Orestes do travel to each other, and quite literally at that. But the cultural translation that takes place leaves behind an inassimilable remainder, one that refuses to be subsumed into the dialectical unfolding of the conversation. And yet, it is this untranslatable remainder that brings them closer and transforms them into friends, as they begin to share a bond that remains open to possibilities that are otherwise than the mere self-duplication of identity. Indeed, such a bond thrusts the friends beyond themselves and towards an open horizon, where it would no longer be possible to simplistically even speak of identity, as if identity could be preserved intact and pure, uncontaminated by the alterity that the other activates in oneself, as if border policing and anti-immigration laws could readily stave off such contaminations. Orestes and Parashuram, standing near the edge of a precipice, encounter the aporia that marks the planet as opposed to the totalizing fantasy of the globe. Speaking in modern Bangla, an ancient Greek and an ancient Indian hero, thus arrive at a logic of friendship and hospitality that is based not on complete agreement, mirroring, or even understanding of the other, but instead on a sharing that is pervaded by difference, loss, and untranslatability, pointing to the self-differing nature of friendship as such. Friendship as less a transactional reciprocity than an experience of a radical incommensurability within oneself, and as a continuous and indefinite grappling with the language of the foreigner. Friendship itself as foreign, the stranger a friend, the self always already a stranger to itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuhin. That was a fantastic presentation. I was, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of too many dots that you have offered us through your lecture, which is extremely cogent. Um, I often identify myself with more with Chirkari than the firm convictions with which the modern world operates. As I was listening to you, I was reminded of J. Daniel Illam's book, Impossible and Necessary. Not impossible yet necessary, but impossible and necessary, which also talks about uh, the undecidability, untranslatability. It actually talks about the act of reading as an act of radical resistance. It talks about Bhagat Singh, for instance, who is waiting for his death and yet tries to read, not author, but read, not write. I was also thinking of Nick Darks's book, The Autobiography of an Archive, where Nicholas Darks is talking about how the CIA, its prototype, I think it was called OSS or something like that, had a pivotal role to play in bringing about not only some contours of comparative literature disciplines in the United States academia, but also the birth of area studies departments across the US universities during and after the Cold War, especially. Um, and your reference to Shishir Kumar Das's imaginative retelling of this conversation between Orestes and um, Parashuram. In that part of your lecture, you briefly mentioned how Orestes' uh, Athena's myth is one of the foundational myths of statehood, the idea of the state. So all these dots have to be connected, and you did that beautifully. Thank you very much. I have more things to talk about with you on these issues, but I think we are slightly running behind the time, and we need to give the space to our next speaker, Shomanadi. I'll try to have more extensive conversations with you once Shomanadi's lecture is completed, and also looking forward to more conversations with Shomanadi after her lecture. Shomanadi, please go
Yes.
ahead and deliver your talk.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kolanda.
Kola.
Yeah, let's talk afterwards. Yeah.
And that was really, really, really wonderful to him. I took 2 pages
Thank
of
you.
notes.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Vishon Bhalo,
Mhm.
And
Thank you. It means a lot.
I find it a strange coincidence, actually, a set of pair of coincidences that both of us, we find ourselves in a session where we are supposed to talk about modernity or modernities. And both of us have gone back to quote unquote an ancient world or what might be characterized as a pre-modern world, but our thesis seems to be the same, that the roots of modernity go back a long time ago. And the other coincidence is I write a column for the Deccan Herald in India, and I just submitted this at 9:30 Indian time today. It is about translation
Ah,
and the impossibility of translation.
yeah. Yeah, indeed, amazing coincidences. And in fact, Mane, one of the reasons I'm also looking forward to your talk, I do not know about Nandolal's Rasa theory, but in one of my classes, আমি এখানে মানে নাট্যশাস্ত্র chapter 6 টাকে একটা undergraduate ক্লাসে পড়াই alongside Aristotle's poetics and so on. So I'm very much looking forward to listening to you as well for that.
I teach the Rasa theory as well, and you brought up the post-colonialists, and there were some career post-colonialists who thought, or who I was trolled for, by them. The assumption was I was teaching Rasa theory, and therefore I must be right-wing. And, so,
Yeah. That is precisely the what we are fighting, I guess, right? Like,
yes, absolutely.
yeah.
So thank you, Anirban, and thank you, Kollan, and of course, Tuhin. The title of my talk is Twig, Petal, Tendril, Leaf, Nondalal's Rasa Theory. When Anirban, kind and gentle always, asked me to speak at this conference, I told him the truth. I knew very little, perhaps nothing, about 3 out of the 4 words in the title: Transnational, Modernities, Planetary. The other two are, of course, a preposition and an article. About the word perspective, I, like everyone else, had my own perspective. Not being a real scholar in the humanities has protected me from these words. The reverse is also true. These categories have been protected from me. From my bio that Kalyan was forced to read out, that useless paragraph that introduces us to the world in places and spaces such as this one, almost like an FIR, as if our crimes are being listed, you would have guessed that I'm neither a scholar nor a researcher. I teach what is often thought of as a fraud discipline, creative writing. All of this is to say that what I will share with you today is a report of a bylane of modernity. Europe likes to believe that modernity originated there. I think, in fact, I would say I believe that we were always modern. It's an intuition. An intuition is my equivalent of Google search that is confirmed from time to time when I encounter a sense of the modern in art or literature or cinema or architecture. I cannot exactly say what constitutes it, what exactly is the modern. But what Augustine said of time, what then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know. This is what I feel about modernity. Today, I want to share with you my thoughts about the artist Nandalal Bose and how he creates a grammar of modernism by adapting and adopting a tradition of thought that has been in the air in the Indian subcontinent for more than 1500 years and has traveled to places like Europe and elsewhere. But that's a subject of a different talk. I have never shared screen on Google Meet before, so let me try. In case I can't, I will ask Anirban, to whom I've just sent this. Share screen. How does one do this? Anirban, will you help me, please?
সুমনাদি, there is an option, ওই যে তিনটে ডট আছে দেখো, ওখানে শেয়ার স্ক্রিনের একটা অপশন থাকে। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ।
There's a page in Vision and Creation that readers leaf through without registering the extraordinary impulse that must have brought it into being. Nandalal Bose is teaching a theory of art emotions, which is what Sheldon Pollock translates, which is how Sheldon Pollock translates rasa. So Nandalal Bose is teaching a theory of art emotions to his students. 8 of these were categorized around the 4th, 5th century CE, one added about 1,000 years ago. Though the rasas, as they are called, originated from the need to create some kind of primer, it would come to solidify as theory much later. There's the Shastra in its title to indulge that, of course. So, though it originated from the need to create some kind of primer for the theater, it would gradually seep into what, in shorthand, might be called an Indian intuition of thought and experience. It would gradually enter the local languages, rasa. Just a second. How does one stop screen sharing? Stop sharing. Rasa, the word, would gradually enter the local languages as words, prefix and suffix, a muscle in a phrase, in the name of sweets and eateries, Roshogolla, and even twisted and mauled into 21st century advertising slogans. Nandalal was only trying to teach his students how to express emotions through lines. He was also, I think, trying to teach them economy, how much it was possible to say in a line or two, in a tiny bend, the hint of an arc, a refusal to be completely straight. And groping for something that would help him to do this, he turns to what is at hand. He might have been teaching outdoors, as so many teachers were compelled to do in Shantiniketan at that time. The leaves and flowers and twigs that I just showed you from the previous slide would have been lying on the earth. And then, in a move that musicians call improvisation, he would have picked them up as teaching tools. I'm imagining this, of course. Part of this imagining is made possible because of my foreknowledge of the book being a translation of Nandalal's book in Bangla, a collection of the teacher Nandalal's notes made by his students. It's a translation by K.G. Subramanian. As a teacher myself, aware of the ad hoc nature of the classroom, I feel the impress of his immediate contingencies on Nandalal. What else could he have found in Shantiniketan, a fledgling university struggling to find funding, new in ambition and energy, guided by a poet's instinct and ambition? So what if the poet was Asia's first Nobel laureate, except its trees and soil at that time? This is the line from that particular slide that I shared with you. Linear rhythms of the 9 aesthetic senses. This is how he headlines the teaching of this cluster of art emotions. Rhythm is the primary driver and ambition for the artists of the Bengal School of Art, the early 20th century modernists, Bengali modernists, Indian modernists. I could have used that, but I would just say modernists. Quite a few things surprise that rhythm should be located and exhibited through something that moves neither like animals nor like the elements is only the first of these. The greatest surprise is that Nandalal rejects the human face completely. This seems all the more astonishing because all the 9 emotions are meant to be primarily expressed through the face. Noticing this today, after an awareness of being surrounded by the heightening and condensation of emotions on the face, whether as emojis, emoticons, or the fetishization of the profile or display photo, one is led to wonder what might have compelled Nandalal, apart from the exigencies of the situation I'm allowing myself to imagine, to turn to plant life to explain the rasas. It would have been an intellectual decision, an unforeseen one in the trajectory the concept has had since its inception, where its location and manifestation and illustration have inevitably been human-centric in theater. How else was one to talk about emotions without the human face? Liberating emotions from the human blackboard was, we can see this only retrospectively now, a revolutionary move, an argument against a face-strong tradition, which itself was, I think, an argument against the growing headstrong bias in thought at the time of Bharat Muni. So it's an argument, I think of Nandalal's as an argument against a face-strong tradition of the rasa and a move towards the non-representational at around the same time that Paul Klee and Kandinsky and other modern European painters were trying to create a language outside the albatross of representation. The first rasa that Bharat Muni gives his attention to is Shringar, love and beauty. Let me share screen with you again. God, shows I'm getting old. The first rasa that Bharat Muni gives his attention to is Shringar, love and beauty. Nandalal comes to its complexity by rejecting the straight line outright. Is it possible for me to minimize this screen? Yeah. There are two examples. So Nandalal rejects the straight line outright. There are two examples he borrows from the plant world. The tendril-like behavior of intertwining, of reliance and balance, this sambhogya. Copulation, a natural culmination of shringar, of loving. Its compulsive intimacy he intends for his students and their viewers to feel the unexpected and almost gravity-defying equilibrium of bodies on each other. The two branches coiled around each other, touching each other at a few points, almost inusculating, not all through the perimeter of their bodies, could feel like a simulation of the walls, holding and letting go, holding and letting go, not glue, but gravity. There's another line Nandalal uses to experience Shringar, a word that K.G. Subramaniam translates as eros. In its form is the manifestation of a different kind of hunger, not love, but life, life and light. That urge has given it this shape, like the mirror image of a question mark, as if it were an answer mark. The stem moved towards light like a lover. It withdrew when frustrated by darkness. That behavior of response to the central figure of one's being, the one we love, is held in its shape. What does Nandalal achieve by choosing these shapes from the plant world? Primary among the things he rejects is the idea of centrality, regurgitated culturally through, say, a phrasing such as, "You are the center of my world." There is no center in either of these stems, the ones intertwined or the single one. They are responses to someone like them or to the elemental world. Nandalal, casually and unself-consciously, dismisses the idea of Shringar as belonging to the human world alone, as being predicated on the face and its limited technology of expressing love, such as kissing. Love is a response to life, a condition of the living. Perhaps that is why the word for life and love are the same in a language such as Hindi. Jaan, Meri Jaan, life, Jaan, Meri Jaan, my love. It might seem as we move through the roster of emotions on your screen that Nandalal is subtracting, that he's tearing away at the coconut to get rid of its core and shell, even flesh, to get to something that is the coconut, but it's not a model of the minus. It's not a model of subtraction. It is a philosophy that derives from the synecdoche, the part for the whole, but also adds to it. Adding to it not necessarily by adding one more line, but by revealing to us the rhythm in a gesture, a gasp, a galley. I want to emphasize the independent but related movements about thought that were clustering around plant life at around the same time. God, why am I so bad at this? I realized that I had forgotten to share screen. Saussure, who was a contemporary of Nandalal, had begun his general course in linguistics with a tree. This is the page from, in translation, of course. arbor. Derrida, a little more than half a century after the linguist, alive and writing at the same time that Nandalal was alive, would turn to the same word, the same species, the signifier, the signified. The signified, the two buzzwords of the 20th century, around which all thought seemed to have crystallized. The two most famous men of the humanities, Saussure and Derrida, had located them in a tree. Amidst the inefficient meaning making apparatus and accoutrements and meaning finding infrastructure of the 20th century, indulged, insurrected, and invigilated by men like Saussure and Derrida, almost bookmarking a generation of thought around them, was a figure like Nandalal, not seeking meaning from the tree, not the intestines of subjectivity, but essence, a flash of lightning that would reveal something of the invisible and imperceptible to them. This investment in the synecdoche, its aesthetic philosophy, implied a faith in form as the identifying mark of the species in life and in art. It reminds me of my understanding of the world as a child, that it was immaterial whether it was an infant or an aged person without teeth. In the changing shape of the mouth, its temporary arc was a smile. Saussure and Derrida's turning to the arbor, to the tree, wasn't arbitrary, even though we would be told later, as an aside, in a lecture given by Levin at the University of California, Berkeley, that Saussure's choice of the tree was, quote unquote, arbitrary, just as Nandalal's wasn't. Will you believe me if I tell you that exactly like Saussure and Derrida, Nandalal, unaware of their existence, was turning to the tree to explain his aesthetic theory? This is what he says. This is Nandalal. Notice the word difference there as well. In terms of their differences in means and media, poetry and painting are distinct. For instance, poetry starts with verbal signs like tree, gach, vita. First the verbal symbol, then the sense of the object. In painting, the object comes first. Through the media of line and colors, it enters the art language. However, neither the tree in the poem nor the one in the painting remains the same as the object. The tree, through their own particular suggestions, they transport a responsive reader or onlooker into an aesthetic experience. Around Nandalal were, among others, two men whose impact is difficult to hold in language, Rabindranath Tagore and Jagadish Chandra Bose. Rabindranath, in song after song, was seeking, quote unquote, Fuler Itihash and, quote, Fuler Bhasha, unquote, the history of flowers and the language of flowers. What Rabindranath noticed as verb, Nandalal saw as noun. One notices the process, the forming, the other the form, the formation. For the poet, the budding, blooming, blossoming, potano, and falling, chora, are forms of becoming, a joyous exploration of life. What exactly did the songwriter mean? And is Nandalal's rasa theory, as he came to express it through found art from the plant world, reflected in it at all? In Shokhi Bhavana Kahare Bole, one of Rabindranath's most well-loved songs about the nature of thought and love, both of which are reliant on language, he tries to distinguish the world of flowers from that of humans. And to do so, he turns to emotions. The elements and the moonlight and the rivers do not know sadness and tears. They only smile. They only sing. The flowers laugh and play, and the petals fall as they smile, as they die. Song should bloom like flowers. ফুলের মতো আপনি ফোটাও গান. Nandalal uses two images to show hasya. I need to go back to this slide again. Is this what I'm showing you?
I think we see your the Gmail accounts page.
That's not mine, that's Anirban's.
Oh, okay. That's what I see now. I don't know. Maybe you could stop screen sharing and reshare if that might help.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I think Anirban was trying to help me.
Yeah, now I can দেখতে পাচ্ছি. Yes.
If you notice, Nandalal uses two images to show hasya. A six-petal flower resembling the form of a lotus, but more open, as if the flower was smiling, hasya. But this is not pathetic fallacy. Nandalal's theory is against any such attribution of emotions through transfer or dislocation. He's trying to locate it in form. So from the line drawing of the flower, he moves to the bare bones of form to its identifiable architecture. He locates it in something that resembles what is called the second bracket, except that he places it horizontally, almost to resemble the mammalian mouth. Is the signature of the rasa, the emotion that he's looking for, that links the human with other living beings. It would perhaps seem a bit antiquated to call this impulse to find a shared link between all living forms, the unity of being. It's a phrase that occurs from towards the late 19th century, but it's a belief that Nandalal shares with his contemporaries, Rabindranath and Jagadish Chandra Bose and various others, besides artists and scientists of that time. If the form of hasya can be found in a flower, so can its opposite, karuna, sadness, pity, compassion. For this, he turns to a drooping flower, its stem like an inverted hockey stick. The flower on the stem, heavy with an obedience to gravity, like the human addicted to their cell phone, often looks like these days. These are the only two rasas where we find flowers. In Hashikanna, to use a phrase from a Tagore song, laughter and tears. It is as if these two rasas are the softest parts of us. For the rest, stems and twigs, fresh and dried, an assemblage of two twigs to look like a soldier with a sword for Rodra, anger. Even the lightning looks like a stem with sharp bends at the nodes. Veera, the hero, is a composition in twigs, a twig man holding a twig trishul. Bhayanaka, the rasa of fear and terror, leads Nandalal away from the semi-straightness of branches towards something that's more petal-like, so that what he gives us are petal-like eyes and an open thalamus-like mouth. Bibhatsa, disgust, is coiled serpent-like, dried pod-like, tamarind pod-like. Adbhuta, wonder, is above in the sky. Shantorosh, he locates in the petal-like flame of fire and a circle with broken lines that could stand for both flower and a radial view of its thalamus. Nandalal puts his theory into practice in the two pages that follow. Let me share them with you. The pages that follow are these. Just see what's happening there. So this is what he gives us at first. Then this. And then the same things. Intertwined branches become embracing human bodies in different degrees and positions of physical love. Shringar, the lotus flower, becomes a jester, a funny man, Hasya. If you've taken a look at this, it becomes easier for me. The lotus flower becomes a jester, a funny man, Hasya. The same line that created the drooping flower can be the mother cow with a suckling calf tucked under her body, Karuna. The twig man turns into an archer on horseback, Rodra. And so the twigs and branches that generated heroism and terror and disgust can, when they are filled with more lines and curves and ink, become an open mouthed, scary animal and hero. Nandalal cannot be sure, as one can see, from his returning to explain each of the rasas again over 3 pages. In this return, after the expansion through the addition of lines, he'd start staking out these extra lines, as if they were lice in hair, unnecessary and damaging to form. The lotus in Hasyaras has lost the lines that made them petals. It is bare, a body of 7 lines, but its essential form remains. It still generates joy, laughter. It can be tweaked a little to become a human, a Chaitanya like figure with raised arms. Lines get added, sometimes subtracted. They transform into humans and animals at various moments of emotional experience, but the spine of form remains the same. I find it impossible to look at these set of diagrams, these drawings, without thinking of the other Bose, Nandalal's contemporary, the scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose. Let me share this with you. This is the other Bose, Nandalal's, not Nandalal Bose, but Jagadish Chandra Bose. This is the Toru Lipi, the plant script. So you see, with the help of the cresograph, what Jagadish Chandra Bose made the plants do or made the plants write, these are preserved in the Bose Museum in Calcutta. This is Jagadish Chandra Bose writing in my translation. Quote, injury startles every living creature. That contraction is life's response, the response of the living. When one is in the fullness of life, the response is the highest in degree. In a moment of exhaustion, the response is feeble. There's none after death. There is compression in a plant when it is hurt, but it is so little that we are most often unable to see it. An instrument will amplify this compression and record it as the plant script. What rasa is in these lines above? The lines that the plants wrote with the help of the cresograph and other instruments. Jagadish Chandra was seeking autobiography, a form where plants write their own stories. But this is outpouring under stress, under duress. This script, facilitated by the instruments Jagadish Chandra designed that he called Torulipi, the plant script, is for all purposes a script of trauma, of horror. What are the rasas we see then? Rodra, anger, bibhatsa, disgust, bhayanaka, horror, Veera, heroism too. These are, of course, our human descriptions. What is interesting is this moment in history where 2 Bengali men who happen to share a surname but come from different disciplinary backgrounds in the first quarter of the 20th century come to plant emotions from adjacent modernist perspectives. The scientist wants the plant to reveal its emotions. The artist thinks of the shared form of plant and human emotions. In both, therefore, there is a shared trust in the plant world, almost a platonic belief that there was no space for untruth and hypocrisy or dishonesty. Whether Jagadish or Rabindranath or Nandalal, living in the neighborhood of each other's ideas and quirks, it seems now to have been a familiar impulse as Saussure and Derrida's. It's an investigation about language. What does it signify, the word arbor? What does it signify, the falling of flowers? A few decades after them, again a time when Nandalal was alive, two other men would arrive and turn to plant life again to subvert the patriarchal form of European philosophy, of European modernity. Deleuze and Guattari would liken Plato to a seed and a trunk and its root, and to oppose this, they would choose the rhizome, the ginger. It was the same impulse then to locate thought in plant form as the two bosses had tried to find feeling in it. Which rasa figure, I ask you, resembles the rhizome? From the diagrams, it would seem that it is Shantarosh, that looks most rhizomatic. Is it only this rasa that, in Nandalal's assemblage of plant parts, is outside the decentering of stem and trunk, flower and fruit? The poet Jivanananda Das, also a contemporary of Nandalal, before the French thinkers, had had an intimation of the structure of grass as a means of disrupting power, not just of the social world, but of life and lifetime itself. Nandalal too notices grass, its form, and species with which he thinks it shares its form. But he is quick to make a distinction. He says, quote, bamboo is a kind of tree. It has a special form of its own which differentiates it from grass, for instance. But there are similarities between bamboo and grass. They are of a type. Contrasted with the shal or shagun trees, they seem closer and can be classified together under a type rhythm. But if one isolates the lines of rhythm of both bamboo and grass, it will not be easy to say whether they represent a bamboo or grass or a fountain. They share lines of force that resemble the spouting forth of a fountain, and this can be called their general rhythm. Unquote. Two words in particular keep recurring in his search for form: type and rhythm. It is the difference in rhythm that produces types. Nandalal, backed by a tradition of categorizing by the rasa theorists of a 1500-year-old tradition of thought, looks for sense and essence. He notices resemblances. He distinguishes on the basis of posture and gesture. While Saussure and Derrida turn to the tree for some version of knowledge, for meaning, or the processes through which meaning comes to be, Nandalal's use of plant life, its fragments, is more urgent and even topical, local, ad hoc. Emotions change, our responses change. How is one to find a form whose axis is in change? He writes, in touch work, there is a calligraphic quality too, but this has to emerge from the feeling, like a wheel track following a cartwheel, or a shadow following a moving man or animal. The brush should follow the mind. Unquote. It was urgent and important, the question of aesthetics, the relation between form and emotion. It troubled Nandalal and his fellow artists in Shantiniketan, as it troubled their contemporaries in England and France and Germany. The Europeans would come to it in various ways, calling it by many names. Quote, aesthetic emotion. Quote, significant emotion. That's T.S. Eliot and Clive Bell. Nandalal wondered how he could communicate the impress of this theory, his theory, into words, into lines. He turned to Tagore, and he writes in a letter, when many years ago I showed an article on this topic to Gurudev Rabindranath, he said, let it be for the present. And I ask you to notice this word present. And this is Nandalal speaking, and I could not understand why. Later, when I had thought it over, I could see that it did not appeal to his poetic and aesthetic temperament, to subject aesthetic quality to minute technical study and analysis. This was only natural. We cannot come into aesthetic experience by study and analysis. This was only natural. Sorry, we cannot come into aesthetic experience by study and debate. One who gets to it does so without effort, by God's grace. One who does not cannot, with all his powers of analysis and skills. In the words of the Atharva Vedas, the aesthetic quality is what survives all analysis. Only when one has got introduced to its substance by way of inborn virtue or the company and influence of artists, poets, and connoisseurs can one profit to whatever extent by such study and analysis. In the hands of the uninitiated and unresponsive, it will not only be unprofitable but harmful as well. Gurudev's advice contained this warning, so I am not publishing the article, only the illustrations. Some indication of the gestural characteristics of the 9 aesthetic essences can be seen in the line drawings, but I repeat that it is dangerous to take these as set formulas for art creation. They should be read and interpreted in the light of the great masterpieces. This is from Nandulal, from a letter by Nandulal. The aesthetic quality survives all analysis. I'll excerpt this from this particular letter. Analysis, theory. These sounded foreign to what Nandulal was hoping to articulate. It was perhaps for this reason that he turns to a world and a being, a species, that to him seemed outside analysis, plants. Again from Nandulal, a letter to his friend, to his student. Rasa itself is God. To strive for rasa is the artist's religion. Burn yourself up for its sake, said Oboni Babu, Abanindranath Tagore. He writes in a letter. In the letters he writes to students, friends, and acquaintances at the time, one notices Nandulal's innate belief in the natural life of the rasa. He is, without actually putting it in words, equating plant life with God. Both are outside intentionality, outside control, outside the will. He's turning to leaves and flowers frenetically for analogies. To gather honey for the honeycomb, you need to sit on flowers that bear honey. What use is there in going after those that don't have any? He directs a student. To someone else, to another student, he says, while painting a landscape, one should imagine that the trees, other things are immersed in light and are growing towards light. All things in nature are soaked in light. Unquote. The world is not revealing itself to him. He feels deprived. If only he were a great artist, he would understand rasa. He writes, I pray now to Vishwakarma that he may in my next life give me access to the rasa of all great art from everywhere. Now I know how great Oboni Babu and Gurudev were. They were both artist and poet, which one cannot become by effort. Unquote. Aware, as only an artist could be, that rasa, its experience and its articulation, whether as word, line, or note, can only be through the synecdoche. He turns away from representation. One of his pit stops is the stylized form of the alpona. Speaking purely as an art teacher, in the most practical idiom, he tells his students about integration and integrated vision. He writes, or he says actually, because his students collected his lectures into this book that K.G. Subramaniam would eventually translate. He said, how does one have a definite and steady image concept? In the way one imagines a round ball or a necklet or a square sheet of paper or a box in one's mind, instantaneously as a whole, not in fragments. It is possible to attain this kind of an integrated vision of things in a flash by regular concentration and practice. This is possible in other ways too, by progressive exercises like doing alponas without a preliminary sketch and so on. As all of us here recognize, alpona too is a move towards non-representation. By then, he has already started thinking of plants as humans and vice versa. I've written about this elsewhere in How I Became a Tree, in some detail and will therefore limit myself to showing how he keeps coming to this particularly in two ways as part. For instance, he writes, the green of the rice fields should appeal to you so much that you become green. Then it becomes part of your personality. So, as part, but also as whole, where he says, a Japanese poet expresses a wish to be a cherry blossom in one of his poems. Why does he have this odd wish? Man is surely greater and bigger than a cherry blossom, but this has its own significance. A man so wishes because he is human. A cherry blossom does not wish to be a man or something else. The obsession with plant life to supply him with a hardy and efficient and working aesthetic theory continues in multiple directions. For instance, I'll just show this to you for want of time so that I don't have to read it out for you. See this. And see this. Over and over again, he turns and returns to the structure of trees. Even when he has to teach his students how to draw seas and mountains, as you saw in the slide I shared with you, he turns to trees again. The phrase he uses to bring them together is, as you saw, rhythmic characteristics. This is exactly what he's advocating when he's teaching the rasas, the inherent form in things that makes them relatives, however dissimilar their original lives might be. He says, the abstract forms of a beetle leaf and a people leaf are both nearly the same, but each has its own speciality over and above this. A knowledge of these minute specialities pushes an artist towards fresher and more original creations. Juggling around with the broad types alone will reduce his work into soulless gymnastics. Note this phrase, soulless gymnastics. Time and again, Nandalal relies on similitude, even taking this along with emotion to mark art like his. He says, the colors in Eastern painting are based on feeling and similitude. While eyes may be compared to the eyes of an antelope or the shape and movement of the bird conjure or a tiny fish, like these comparisons or similitudes, as are used to determine the form of things in Eastern painting, there are others when it comes to the choice of color. Note the words he uses: similitude, similarities, groups, clusters. Lineages that derive not through identities that owe to socio-political origin, not to difference, but to form. But first, the theory. He writes, when the mind tries to grasp the form of a thing, it generally tries to draw a comparison between it and the form and attributes of a similar but more familiar object. This is termed Shadrishobodh, sense of visual equivalence or similitude in Indian aesthetics. It is through this that each form gets its schema. To call to mind the shape of the eye, it is necessary to call to mind its similarity to a lotus petal, both for its shape characteristics and attractiveness. And so he continues. And then he moves to praxis. Uh, he says that it is art emotion that is bringing these differences together. And notice the word diverse when people on another continent are using the word difference. Rasa makes things diverse, and the same rasa establishes complete unity amongst things. When deeply absorbed in rasa, the sense of diversity among objects disappears. Then emerges the indivisible, abiding rasa with which prevails the supreme joy, ananda. That is why we cannot fully analyze a great painting, though we can fully enjoy one. He asked the student to study the monoculus tree. Watch the tree for some time, go and sit near it, morning, noon, evening, even in the darkness of night. That will not be easy. After sitting for a while, you will feel bored. You will feel that the tree is telling you in annoyance, "What are you doing here? Go away, get lost." Then you will have to coax the tree and say, "My teacher has asked me to. I cannot but heed him. Please don't be annoyed. Be nice to me. Show yourself out to me." If after a few days of such effort you feel you are seeing the tree, then go home, close yourself up, and paint the tree. You will have first to like something about the tree, then only will you see the tree, or your seeing becomes significant. The cultivation of this is the cultivation of art, and so on. Unquote. I notice two things. Nandalal and his trees, of course, must be, but I mean two other things. The invisibility of the root in his discourse of lines. Is it because emotion must be manifest and root is not? That it belongs to a separate architecture, a different knowledge system of secrets kept from the human? As long as the sky is drunk with date palm juice, Khejure Rosh, I will bear witness to that, Randalal writes in a letter. Unquote. Date palm juice, Rosh, Rasa, taste, savoring, joy. There seemed to be no other way for him to summarize life, his life, the life of a modern. Thank you.
Thank you, Shumanadi, for that wonderful lecture on Nandalal Bosu, and also, I believe, to a great extent on Rabindranath and Jagadish Bose. Because we are running behind the time, I think we should open these sessions, both the sessions, for the questions and the responses from the speakers. I have a couple of observations on um, Tuhin's lecture that I couldn't elaborately make after his lectures. So I would like to share those with all of you, and particularly with Tuhin. But before that, I think I will invite questions for both the speakers, for Shumanadi's presentation as well as Tuhin's. Is
Kulin,
there
if there's no one else, I'm a host, but maybe I can go.
No, that's absolutely fine. Please, Amrita, go ahead.
Yeah. To Tuhin, I mean, like, this is more of an observation rather than a comment. I mean, I could not help my mind wander into it, maybe because I do archetypal criticism a little bit. How the idea of this forgetting mother is such a perfect metaphor for the planet, or the entire, the patriarchal, industrial, capitalist complex, the way that it treats the planet, in a way that the forgetting mother is a perfect metaphor for it. I mean, always ready to receive violence, and then it will forget the violence that has been done unto it. And there will be no consequences of that. The earth, as the pliant, fertile being, will forever be ready to absorb any violence that is done unto it. So it was, beautiful. A lot of Greek myths are used for archetypal criticism, but it just came from your lecture, and thank you so much for it. I mean, we can go many ways with it, so thank you for that. I mean, it was not really in the direction that you were going, but it came from that. So that one, I mean, if you would like to comment or not, I mean, just a comment that I was thinking about. And Shumanadi, yesterday, we had a fascinating keynote talk, where while we were discussing modernity, one of the problems of modernity is this splitting up of branches. I mean, Shogata Bhadri was talking about how, natural sciences and the social sciences that we all know about. I mean, modernity splits these branches of knowledges where they can never meet again in sort of way. In a similar strain, I was thinking, and again, coming from your lecture, I mean, modernity also has induced this split between I mean, the emotions and very mind-based. I mean, of course, it has a longer history. I mean, we can go back to the Enlightenment for that and Descartes, but I think modernity has also completed this split in such a way that, they twain cannot meet. It is so fascinating that during the time of high modernism, exactly at that point, that these men, they were turning to emotions as a critique of Eurocentric modernity. So this link between emotions and the way that we can critique modernity, and of course with the entire idea of planetarity and bio, which you so well do. So that was there. Thank you for that. I mean, I've also taken notes, extensive. So thank you.
If I
Thank
could,
you. Yeah, please go ahead, Tuhin, first.
yeah, okay, thank you. If I could just go first. First of all, Shumanadi, thank you for this extremely rich presentation. Like I really did not know about Nandalal's theories of rasa, but this was so fantastic. Especially, I think I'm really interested in this idea of decentering the human and critiquing the this kind of the identification of the face as the locus of rasa. It was just very, very fascinating. And it also made me think of, I teach Abhigyan Shakuntalam, and there too I think the plant world is just so important, and it is again the humanization of the plants and the plantification of the human characters plays a very important role there. So yeah, this is fascinating. Thank you. Amrita, to your comment, that's an excellent observation. I wasn't thinking about, but you're totally right that I think in both traditions, in both Greek and Sanskrit traditions, there is an identification of the earth with the maternal, right? In Hesiod's Theogony, which is again the kind of original mythology or foundational mythology for the Greeks, we have Gaia. Gaia is the earth goddess, and what we see in Hesiod's Theogony, in kind of the movement of the genealogy of the gods, is a movement from the figure of Gaia, who is this powerful mother, with unbridled fecundity, who can parthenogenetically create. That is, like she doesn't require a man or a male principle or a male god to reproduce. So we see that at the very beginning. But as we move through the genealogy, there is an appropriation of that power. So we move from Gaia to somebody like Hera, who is a much more domestic goddess. Like, she is Zeus's wife. She's a domestic goddess, while Gaia is not. Gaia has multiple partners, right? But so there's a movement from Gaia to Hera to Athena, who is born of the father's head, to finally Pandora. Pandora, who is a woman who is artificially created by male gods, and therefore cut off from her from maternal origins, like she's created by, and she's the first woman. She's the first woman who is sent to men as an evil, as a beautiful evil, and she becomes the mother of all other humans to come, which is really interesting, because then she cut it the maternal roots of human beings is cut off, because the original mother, Pandora, who is the mother of all humans, doesn't have a mother, right? She's created by. So I think we see this appropriation at work in Greek mythology. Something a little different we see in India, in ancient Indian philosophical texts as well. I'm thinking of the Shankha Darshan, where it's a dualist philosophy with Purusha and Prakriti, and Prakriti is repeatedly identified, especially in pre-classical Sankhya, with the field that is to be plowed and cultivated, while the masculine principle Purusha is so the feminine principle Prakriti is Kshetra as in the field, Khetro, while Purusha is the Kshetragya, the one who knows the field, the one who plows the field, right? One who plows the field, and therefore reaps the fruit of the field. So I think this language of appropriation, of mining that you were referring to, of the planet is very much there in philosophical traditions. And I think this is enabled actually by this by the identification of the feminine with the earth as well. So thank you. That was excellent.
You mentioned Abhigyan Shakuntalam, and when you were speaking about forgetting, I was thinking about the text myself, how important forgetting is to that, and the recurrence of forgetting throughout. And when Dushyant sees Shakuntala for the first time, Kalidas's language makes it possible, or not makes it possible, compels us to see Shakuntala as a vine, as something created out of plants. And one of the things that one begins to notice retrospectively, and whether it's retrospective or not, I'm not sure, is the fact that some of the dissonance happens because Dushyant is a person not of the forest. He's urban, he comes from the city, he's king in a kingdom. This is a different world altogether. And also, Plow, I was thinking about Sita and where she was found. So, yeah, in response to both Amrita and Tuhin. What you said, Amrita, about Shogato mentioning this breaking up of disciplines in a way that, which is what, the career of the humanities and the sciences in the 20th century. So we don't know whether Aristotle, for instance, was a botanist or a physicist or a philosopher. He could be all of these things. And as some of contemporary Buddhist thinkers have reminded us, that would not be called multitasking. The phrase would not have existed. I think this breaking up into silos became a very opportunistic professional need to generate, I'm giving a very prosaic answer, to generate more jobs in academia. So, I teach at a hyphenated department, English and creative writing. I studied in a college, in Shiliguri College, where one of my favorite professors was a poet. But my degree is in English literature. So it was possible, and it continues to be possible in an older world, such as the kind of college, fortunately, the kind of college environment you are teaching in, or Nirvan is teaching in, where you could teach quote unquote creative writing through literature itself. So dividing this, and this is not an original thought. It has been written about from the 1990s, particularly in an essay in 1996. I'm very bad with names, where the English department is being broken down into media studies, into creative writing departments, so that more people can, get jobs and so on. What purpose this has served, I don't know. I remember Arundhati Roy being asked a question about being a writer come activist, and you will remember her response. She said, "It makes me feel like a sofa come bed." And so similarly with many of us, where our heart lies in what is literature or used to be literature, it's so heartening to listen to Tuhin speak about literature through literary terms. Almost anachronistic in our times, where we are forced to kind of say, oh, Tuhin, where is some version of the social sciences, and we didn't go that way. So it's wonderful to have there. So one of the problems I think with literature departments is the fact that we've become outposts of sociology departments. And then, so, sociology needs, let me say this. Kollan mentioned how the CIA and, the creation of area studies that has been well documented and so on. That continues the native informant model
Absolutely.
continues in many, many ways, but most importantly, not in sociology and anthropology departments as much as in literature departments. When Tuhin turned to Emily Apter, I was also thinking about David Damrosch, that not to read all these literatures is almost like an United Nations model of world literature.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's disheartening. I mean,
It's a very developmentalist model.
absolutely. And I don't understand it. I mean, it's not that being well read is going to, the word that, and I'm going to damn rush because of a particular tick of mine, and he goes saying, using this word in the context of America, where he
Mm.
says, if you don't read these things that he understands as world literature, you will remain a provincial American reader. And this is the height of making a provincial statement himself. It's so.
And then Professor Shumara chose to be provincial.
No, but I don't understand. Kullan, none of us picked up books for these particular reasons. I wanted to ask Tuhin.
True.
Tuhin, where did you? Where does your interest in Indian philosophy, in rasa theory, in Greek literature come from? And we use the word brave for only writers, who take on the state. I think it's also very brave of uh, writers and translators like Tuhin to reject a ready-made model where you have to please certain silos. I wanted to say something that I couldn't say to him, which is I look forward to your translation of Shishir Kumar Das's book. It's something that I'm really, really interested in. I
Thank
had no
you.
idea about this book. He was very
Yeah,
important. I'm very old, he was very important to some of my professors at university who had
yeah.
been raised on a way of thinking that where passports and nationalities of literatures and writers did not matter. What representation wasn't a god, a resident god in literature departments at that time.
Yeah, I
Mm.
think that's the old Calcutta, old Bengali kind of thing that many of us grow up with, right? Where we pick up books randomly and start reading them without really thinking of where they're from or what kind of end this will serve, and so on. Yeah, so I'm translating it. To be honest, I've been very slow with it because I mean, this is my third year in the job right now, but so it's been a little busy, but yeah, I have I'm translating it with Jadavpur University Press, so hopefully, yeah, soon.
What you shared with us today, is it going to be the introduction of that book, or is it going to be a
Tran-
separate?
No, so like a translation with introduction and some annotations, like.
No, what you shared with us today, your talk.
Oh no, this is kind of from. So the first part, like the planetarity and spiritual part, is a different thing. But the Parshuram and Orestes is this what I shared today is a short version of one of the chapters of my book project. Like it's not the translation, but the book that I'm like the monograph that I'm working on. So yeah.
Mm.
Can I just respond, not in a direct way, but to Amrita's question and also to what Tuhin said about translation, also something Kollan very wisely kind of summarized. It is, the fact that I ended up speaking in Bangla in response to Tuhin's, what Tuhin said, and also how Tuhin responded. It's one of the things that I get a lot in Ashoka University where I teach, but also in other places. That why do Bengalis immediately begin speaking with each other in Bangla?
We were
Uh,
just oblivious to the rest of the audience, and we thought that we are all Bengali speaking people.
yeah, that is true. One of the an extension of this is why do you only talk about what not only sorry why do you always talk about Bangla literature? And it's an Amit Shah version of, through the Bengalis into the Bay of Bengal
There has
kind
been
of.
a political regime in our state, Shumana, if you're forgetting.
What will they take from people like you and me? I mean, kinebe. But the thing is, this question, why do you always bring up Bangla literature, is a question. Why is Kalyan editing an anthology of Bangla writing in Dalit writing? This is a question that will not be put to a Spanish writer, an Italian writer, a German writer. It's as if, it's not some version of silly ethno-nationalism that makes us go to these. These are the languages that have raised us. These are the literatures that have raised us, and we will naturally talk about them. And this is something that I find is enabled by this silly world literature model as well, where you are supposed to know all other kinds of literature and think of, say, oh, Bangla literature, there's a pie chart in your head. But it wasn't that pie chart that raised me. It might raise the next generation. My students are raised on a diet of Japanese novels and Korean drama. Their worlds might be different, but my world is very, very different in the sense that I was raised by Bangla, as I imagine Kalyan and Amrita and Tuhin, all of you were, and so on. So that too, I think, is an opportunistic.
No, Amrita and I did PhDs in Bangla literature. We didn't do it on English literature.
Yeah.
Everything
Both
that
of
I
us.
have written since my PhD goes back to Bangla literature because I read more of Bangla literature, not because, I must be a card-bearing Bangla literature person, but this is where I find it hard to read contemporary fiction in English. But with Bangla, there's no struggle. It's just, so yeah.
But in response to what Shomanadi you were talking about, I think, although I'm sure you are not okay with the analytical and the theoretical things that some of us do, I do know about the anxieties that you have and where you come from. In spirit, I'm with you, but just to be a little playfully in disagreement, I think we need some amount of analysis as to how we ended up here. Why is it that these models are so pervasively present? And why is it that you and I, when we focus on Bangla literature, Amrita does, we are often asked these questions? I think that the tentative answers to those pervasive patterns that we are complaining about can be traced back to what Tuhin was talking about. I think one of the founding principles of modernity, especially colonial modernity, is not how it encountered the unfamiliar or the foreign, but how it responded to the unfamiliar. I think the foundational sort of characteristic of modernity is to transform the unfamiliar into something familiar, right? And that rendering of the unfamiliar as the familiar is the root of so many problems. I think, the other day I was reading Parthacharya's book for a Just Republic, and this is a concept that he has repeated in several of his books: the rule of the norm and the exception. Right. So there is as Jeremy Bentham came up with, and there is a normative understanding of civilization, and Tuhin was talking about Shishir Kumar Das thinking of Shabhata, etc. And how Parashuram, Orestes, they were talking about Shabhata, Bhavishwat, etc. I think the Benthamite principle is at work when we talk about this norm and exception formula that Chatterjee is underscoring in some of his writings, and the extreme emphasis on being certain about your propositions, about your assumptions. That's where this tendency to familiarize the unfamiliar comes from. And that is why I was referring to, as I was listening to his lecture, I was thinking of that book, Impossible and Necessary. I was also thinking of my earlier engagements with the debate between Trotsky and John Dewey in Mexico, where Dewey wanted to focus on the necessity of thinking, something that Chiracari is doing, perhaps, that he's thinking before embarking on an action. But modern world, the world of modernity, the world of colonial modernity, as well as post-colonial political modernities that we inhabit, always emphasis on the certain things, that there is a necessity to be decisive and certain, right? That's what we are celebrating. Whether you belong to the left or the right wing of the political ideology spectrum doesn't matter. What connects both these kinds of people is this emphasis on being certain. And I think that's the risk of translation, to open up spaces that do not want to be transformed into something familiar, to render it open, to let it stay, that sense of anxiety, that sense of uncertainty. I think you are a great translator, so you would know it better as a practitioner of the art of translation. Because colonial modernity thrived on translation. So we are clearly not trying to replicate that model. That's what Spivak is talking about. That's what Emily After is talking about. That's what Tuhin is trying to talk about. That's what you are doing in your practice of translation. So I think that's the spirit in which we engage with what Anirban is trying to come up with, transnational modernities. It's not United Nation-like or even a Goethe-like world literature template in which you put together samples of different pockets of the world literature, but try to realize that encountering the unfamiliar, to let the unfamiliar remain a bit of an unfamiliar existence, and yet have conversations with the unfamiliar. That's, I think, is the spirit in which we were discussing so many things. If I am to
yes, absolutely.
I just like to respond in 30 seconds. One is, I am not against analysis or critique. It's just,
no,
yeah,
I
just don't like
playfully disagree with
this supermarket model of theory. Yes, Tuhin brings a text,
course,
I bring a text, and Amrita's a supervisor and say, do a feminist reading. This is and you just put it on. So, yeah, I hate that.
Absolutely. But I think those people who do those things also don't understand what theory really means. Right?
Absolutely. And the other was what you said about this defamiliarization. I think two modernists from very different cultures, because this is what Tuhin has been doing, and also Anirban kind of wrote that concept note. Whether it's Kolatkar talking about defamiliarization or Brodsky,
absolutely, yeah,
who calls it estrangement, as characteristics of the modern. And I completely, believe me, if you were here, I would go and hug you. I hate the Shabjanta figure.
absolutely.
Perspective of, political affiliation.
That's the Hegelian pedantic historian that Rabindranath so hated deeply. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean,
Yeah.
I can't even control my personal life. I have done so many wrongs and mistakes and made errors in my life. How can I know what others are doing is right or wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah, it is. It's frustrating to be surrounded by Shabjantas, particularly the world that we live in. I just thought my father was a shop janta. It now turns out that everyone else is also a shop janta. Sorry.
Yes. So in connection with Kalyan's argument and Shrimadi's, so I was thinking about both of you were going back to the antiquity, and at the end of your lecture, while you were concluding your lectures, and Tuhin was coming back to the question of non-translatability. And this actually leaves a space of something beyond, remains. And at the same time, when Shrimadi concluding a lecture with the metaphor of the invisibility of the root. So these are in a way are crisscrossing, intersecting moment, the question of the unknowability. And when you are mentioning Emily After, and Emily After, while talking about the question of untranslatability, she was actually referring to the question of deep language learning, the child's way, the impossible way, and the continuous suspension of it. In it, these kind of spaces as excess, as beyond, something that remains as unknowable. The space of unknowability is again connected with the question the metaphor of the planet, planet thinking and plant thinking, the invisibility of the roots, mulhinota, or kulhinota. This is the space of the unknowable that is again attuned with the true calmness of modernity, the modernity that is coming, that is not yet, the structural, the anticipatory structure that is there, the structural necessity, and at the same time there is a surprise. That is totally an okay, the moment, the contingent moment. So in this way, I think these two lectures are connected, though you were going back to the antiquity, Rasa theory, and Orestes and all other things. But at the same time, we were moving on to the question of the true calmness of modernity with planet thinking, plant thinking, invisibility of the roots, and we were talking about non-translatability and the porous moments. At the end of Poros, again connected with the very rhythmically porous, the path, the pathlessness. So these are the things I were thinking about or reflecting about, and this is the antidote to the subjanta model. Thinking the unknowability, the space there remains. This remaining something beyond. So thank you, Kalyan, for chairing the session. This is a brilliant and engaging engaging session, and of course it is a learning and enriching experience for us all. Thank you all. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and thank you
Anirban and Amrita.
Yes.
Thank you, Shomanadi and Tuhin, for being there, and absolutely love both the sessions.
Yeah, and it just felt like I was at home. That's the best thing, one does not feel like that. It was like Ghoroa Adda. I'm sorry, I'm being a Bengali
again. Are you in Delhi
again.
or in Siliguri now, Shomanadi?
Siliguri. Yeah, thank God for that. Yes, you know what.
I'll get in touch with you, Shomanadi. Maybe we can, if you're in, I'll be in Kolkata soon, so we can.
Will you be coming to Siliguri? I rarely come to Kolkata.
Really?
But I might be coming to get a visa.
But Tuhin, we live in Kolkata. There are other people living in
I know,
Kolkata.
exactly. No,
we missed the opportunity of meeting each other in New York, so let's get to meet in Kolkata.
So, Kalyan, some of our participants have raised their hands. So, we quickly some kind of comments, queries.
No, I think Anirban,
should wrap it up.
Are we being mindful of the schedule? I think we're running late, and so you can take those questions later on. You can send those questions to the speakers once the conference is over.
If you want to.
Yeah,
So,
if you do you want to do that, or do you want to respond to some of those questions?
For 5 minutes, because they are about very, very engaging and very
sure.
So Dipanjan and Dipanjan Muhuri.
Hello, it was a very engaging session. I was listening to the bits about the untranslatables and how it is related to our understanding of the modern or the modernity. I was reminded by this essay of this very thoughtful and thought-provoking essay by Professor Supriya Chaudhuri. This essay is called Resistors of the New, Translating Modernity in the 19th and 20th Century, where she is actually cogitating about the facts whether the terms modern and modernity are translatables, whether they can at all be translated. And Supriya Chaudhuri very interestingly writes that she refers to Barbara Cassin's philosophical lexicon of untranslatables, where she comes across this German pair called Neusit and Moderne. And it's very interesting to note that Neusit can be translated as modern times, whereas Moderne can be translated as modernity. The person who writes the entry for the Neusit Moderne pair notes, this is very interesting, that the former, meaning Neusit, extending from the 5th century Italian Renaissance to the 20th century, is this historic periodization, whereas Moderne is a philosophical aesthetic description. But then she very interestingly notes, Febel notes, that the Germans do not use the term Neusit beyond 20th century, because then the discussion shifts to the value of modernity, for which they use the term moderne. And for the term moderne, the term moderne cannot be translated into any other European languages, particularly to the French. The French has no such term which would specifically can be dedicated to the value of modernity. Now, I was trying to link this with two essays by Bonkem. One is Onukoron, and the other is Bongo Desher Krishok, where in the former essay Anukaran, Bankim is being very critical of imitation. Bankim says that imitation is the vice for which the new Bengali creature, which he describes as a man-animal complex, is losing all his identity. But then in the same essay, he almost shifts 180 degree and says that without imitation there cannot be any progress. The English has the Romans have imitated the Greek. The English have imitated the classical antiquity, and now we are imitating the English. But then I was also thinking about Sudipta Kaviraj's brilliant book on Chattopadhyay, where Sudipta Kaviraj brilliantly points out that the tragic situation with colonial imitation is that it is not about self-recuperation. It is rather about a kind of emulation, which is the imitation of the alien other. But when you come to the next essay by Bankim says that this is a necessary evil. We can't do much about it because the choice of modernity within the colonial context is inextricably linked to the choice of subjection, colonial subjection, without which the conditions of the former cannot prosper. I thought that I was just trying to add to the debate by contextualizing the debate within the 19th century colonial Bengal and how Supriya D has read it by talking about modernity as a process of disruption and continuity. That was my bit. I was really happy and was really grateful to the speakers. It was a fascinating session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dipanjan. That's a lovely response, and I've made notes of the essays. Lovely also to hear your voice after having been Facebook friends for a while.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We have been a Facebook friends. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Dipanjan and I have a long history. He was my junior in college, at Ramakrishna Mission Vidya Mandir, where Kolanda is also an alumnus. Yeah, we have been in course. I was just talking to him just right before the session.
Yes.
Thank you, Dipanjan. Yeah, I have also I haven't read any of these essays either by this essay by Supriya or I was just thinking of okay, you at least didn't say Bankim Da when you were referring to Bankim.
Thankfully, I did not.
But thank you. Yeah, I will look them up. Also, I look at myself and I feel like I can. My brain is kind of shutting down. It's like 2:30 a.m. in the morning here.
He's very sleepy. We must really let him go.
Yes.
I'm very sorry to miss the.
No, but it's quite evident you're very tired. Let's just move.
Okay. So thank you all. Thank you very much, Shomanadi, Tuhin, and Kalyan. So we'll move on to the next session, which will be chaired by Dr. Shunirmal Das. So,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Dipanjan,
Those
are excellent points. I'm particularly interested in that because I have been reading up on Sudipta Kaviraj and Partho and 19th century Bengal, etc.
Yes.
for quite some time. So let's have more discussions on these issues.
Certainly, Dada. Thank you so much.
I have another meeting, so I've already started driving. Yeah, sorry about this.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.